Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. How are you, Kim?
I'm great. How are you, Mark?
You should be great.
So I'm awesome. I'm better than great.
I've been waiting for this episode.
Oh,
Kim,
yay.
As everybody knows, we are always talking that Kim is the bubbly queen and king of sparkling wines. Oh, I shouldn't say king, queen of sparkling wines.
I could be the king.
And she had the opportunity to go to Champagne, France, and we are going to talk all about it, Kim, with our listeners. I have so much to ask you. Welcome back. Welcome home.
Thank you.
I stalked you and followed all your
everybody did. It was wonderful. I still have a few more pictures that I probably should share with people, but I had a wonderful time. It was an educator trip. So it was a group of 14 people from all over the world, but this was an English speaking group that we went for a number of days to learn about different aspects of Champagne and then come back home to our home market and spread that education.
So for our listeners, this was a business trip.
This was a business trip.
To be educated on Champagne, which it's an update for Kim. I know you've been to France before, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever gone to Champagne before?
I have. This was actually my second time in Champagne.
So
the first time I went was right before the pandemic hit. So it was late fall 2019. We went in November. Just remember being so cold, so cold down in the cellars. Champagne is typically a very, very wet region, which I don't think a lot of people know. It doesn't really rain in the summertime, but the fall and the winter and early spring is very rainy. So it was raining for a lot of the time that we were there. It was cold, but not as cold as here. And I was surprised to see that the flowers were probably 3 weeks to a month ahead of where we are here. So they already had daffodils and tulips and forsythia, and we don't get there until late April. So it was very interesting to see the difference in the climate just between home and central France.
Well, before we get deeper into that, you flew to where? Paris?
Flew to Paris.
And that was about how long? I need all the little...
It was a 6.5 hour flight. So I took the red eye, went overnight, and then got in early in the morning. And then a group of us all met up at the airport. And then it's a 45-minute train ride from Paris to Champagne. So it's actually not that far away from the city. But as everyone I'm sure has been seeing from the news, there is a lot of strikes going on. It started with the transportation unions, and now it's kind of all over the place with some of the policies that Macron has started to put in place. So there was a train strike. So I couldn't actually ride the train from Charles de Gaulle to Champagne. So it was about an hour by car. So really not that far. If you think that the difference between Paris is the same as between down here in Franklin and getting to Boston, that's not very far.
And it's from Paris to Champagne, it's northeast, correct? Going more north or straight across
just east? Just a little bit northeast, but east-ish, yeah.
And you mentioned the rain and the weather. Champagne is famous because it is the most northern wine growing region in France. So they always have to put up with that type of weather.
So it really is on that grape growing limit. So it's always on the cooler side than a lot of other places.
I was curious if you hit all that strike and stuff like that.
It impacted our travel. I had friends who were staying on who needed to take the train to other places in Europe, and that was going to prove difficult for a few people.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your overall impression of the people of the region, were they still as friendly with all this going on? Or?
Oh, yeah. It was wonderful. It really was. People are friendly. And I think that I've seen in a lot of wine growing areas that there's an openness and there's a friendliness and there is this wish to really share what they do. And when you're actually talking to the owners and you're talking to the winemakers and you're talking to the cellar masters, just the guys who this is just their regular job. They get dirty in the cellar and they move bottles around, kind of like us working here in a liquor store. You do what you have to do and you get dusty and you get your hands dirty and you get a bunch of splinters. They're so passionate about their product. It's something that they're making with their hands and they really want to share it with you. So even if we're talking about big houses that sell at very expensive bottles of wine, when you're talking to the people who are making them, they're just everyday people like you and me just doing a job, and they're very excited to share what they're doing with you. So I love that about wine people, that they might be selling a $150 bottle of champagne, but they're wearing ripped jeans and sneakers and baseball hats just like we are.
Yeah. And to be honest, Kim, I watch so many champagne documentaries just to keep up with you. But now you just said a few things. I have a million follow-up questions, but you had mentioned about seeing all the flowers, this and that. And I kind of wanted to ask you, one of the highlights I always see about the region is the soil is this chalky soil.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that white chalky soil everywhere you went where you saw vineyards? Is it that pronounced?
When we talk about very special regions like Champagne, we do get very geeky about soil. And someplace special like Champagne, where it is on this limit, one of the reasons why the wines are so special is because they have this unique soil. And a lot of it is, like you say, chalk. So over time, a lot of the cellars have been dug into the chalk underneath mainly the main city of Reims, which is where we stayed. But you literally touch the chalk. If you're walking even in the street, it's there. And one of the cellars that we went into, you could walk along a hallway and brush your hand across the wall and you would get white clay stuck under your nails like you're a third grader in art class making something out of clay. And then the next hallway, you can reach up and touch the top part of the wall and someone has carved their initials in, and it's next to the number 1910 in the chalk, and it feels like chalkboard chalk. Like there's all of this textural, like really feeling like it's real when you can put your hands on it and really be like, oh, this is literally chalk that these grapevines are planted in. And it's everywhere. And just like you said, it is absolutely everywhere. So that was one of the big takeaways for me, was being able to see all that and feel it and smell it. And it literally smelled like art class, like downstairs, down in some of the cellars. And you really get this idea that, oh, wow, this is what the grapes live in. And this is why they can be so unique here, because we have these soils that don't feel like you're in a garden. It makes you feel like you're in art class.
Now talk about the cellars, Kim, because I'm told, you have to verify, there's one like major street where all the major houses, champagne houses, and then that street is just all their cellars of the champagne.
So there are a couple of different places throughout the region that the main champagne houses are located. So there are some that are located in the town of Epernay, which is the road that you're talking about is located in Epernay. And then there's Reims, which is the main capital of the region. It's known very well historically because there's a cathedral in the town that a lot of the old kings of France would always be coronated in. So there are plaques everywhere saying all of the Louis were crowned here, and it was hundreds and hundreds of years of French kings being coronated in cathedrals. It's big and it's beautiful. So a lot of the wineries are located in Reims and have these underground cellars that are dug into the chalk, dug into the clay. But then there's this other main road that's located in Epernay that's called like Champagne Road. I forget what it is in French. And that a lot of the big major houses have their headquarters / wineries / cellars located on. So like that's where Moet is. And there's the big statue of Dom Perignon that we always put up in our classes when we're talking about champagne. Tattinger has a place and Roederer has a place. And just you drive down this street and you see all of these famous houses. And yeah, it's a very great place to take a lot of pictures.
Yeah, I bet. And I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned history, so much history. A lot of it has to do with the struggles they went through for wars. I mean, it was always something going on there with wars. Did you see like that type of history about the battles they put up with, or was it more? Yeah. I mean, no,
it's still very much in the forefront of a lot of the minds of the people who live there, because a lot of the people who currently reside in Champagne, their families have been there for a very long time. So there are monuments all over the place to either soldiers who were lost during World War I, or because the region was so devastated by physical battles during World War I that there are a lot of like monuments to this was here, or this battle took place on such and such a date. It reminded me an awful lot of like Civil War kind of memorials where you have plaques and you're like, so many people died in this battle, and, you know, on this date in this place this happened. So that it really did still feel like it was very much in the modern imagination of the town's history. And I think because it's a region that has so much history, memory lasts for a very long time. So yeah, everywhere we went, there was still that reminder of even things that happened over 100 years ago.
And I want to stay on the history. I want to get to Dom Perignon, but before that, I think
guess who we never talked about.
yeah, that was, well, I want to get to that. Hold that thought. But first, I think one of the most amazing things about Champagne that most people don't probably know is the history of the impact of women in Champagne. And you must be, as a woman in this field, so proud to tell the stories of the famous women in Champagne and how long ago these women were in charge of these champagne houses and their contributions to Champagne. Is that something, as going there for the education part, did they focus on that a lot?
No, not as much.
Really?
And I think, but one of the reasons I'm just being very optimistic here that maybe it hasn't, that we're not focusing on it so much now is because as so many family wineries are being passed to the next generation, they're being passed to the daughters and not the sons. So we are really seeing this sea change across the wine world, where as the baton is being passed down to the next generation, it is this whole generation of women who are taking over the reins of their family wineries.
But that's really how it started.
Right. But I'm saying that it's everywhere. Like, it's not just in Champagne, but it's in Chianti, and it's in Burgundy, and it's in Bordeaux, and it's in Argentina, and it's in California, and it's in New York. It's normal now. And so I'm hoping that the normalization of it is maybe the reason why we're not talking about it as much, because it's like, oh, yeah, okay. But you're absolutely right that the history of Champagne is a history of female owners and of barriers that women had to sort of struggle to overcome in order to be the ones in charge at their family businesses. We hear a lot of stories about, okay, so some guy started his winery and he passed away and they only had daughters, but the daughter got married. And so technically it went to the son-in-law, but really she was the one running it, and kind of like that. But there have been, it comes down in Champagne lore about all of these innovations that, say, we have from the widow Clicquot, or that we have from the Tattinger families, which right now is also run by a woman. Their next generation's Vitaly Tattinger, so she is the one who's running their operation. We visited Biacart Salmon, and they are 7th generation now, and Biacart was him and Salmon was her, and they combined their wineries and they combined their names, and the rest is history. So there has been that tradition of female power, I would say, in Champagne, and it is still very, very, very noticeable.
And you talked about Dom Perignon. We always say he kind of stole the idea of sparkling wine and brought it. Yeah. So there wasn't much focus.
No, I mean, we really didn't. So I think one of the reasons why maybe we didn't talk about those things is because the folks who were on this trip with me, we were all very high level wine people to begin with. So it's not like they were rolling out those kinds of stories because A, we already knew them, and B, we were for like a different type of education than sort of the mythology of Champagne. So we talked a lot more about the nitty gritty of research and development into new grape varieties, or how are newer methods of pest control and weed control being used. So kind of the dry stuff that maybe isn't super exciting for the public, but as far as sustainability about wineries and wine growing, that was a lot of what we tried to focus on.
The whole idea of the trip was educators to come there to get educated.
Right.
But so is what Champagne trying to get out to educators is that this is what's happening, but did they want you to convey that back, or they just want to update educators to know what's going on?
I think a little bit of both. One of the things that I appreciated was that I didn't get a lecture about Dom Perignon, because they just made the assumption that we already knew all that stuff, which was true because we did already know that stuff. So it was like new stuff for us to add to our arsenal when speaking about champagne. So like we already know about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and we learned a little bit more about Pinot Meunier and some of the other grape varieties that are used in smaller quantities for making champagnes. What else did we talk about? But like, yeah, it was stuff that was kind of new and different to add to all of the stuff that we already know that we can bring back.
Right. I'm sure it was like spectacular learning experience. And I have a lot of follow-up questions on a lot you learned.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Kim and Mark. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and you can find more information about Mark at his website, Franklin Liquors. I can be found at commonwealthwineschool.com. Hi, everyone. Mark is questioning me today about my recent trip to Champagne in France, and I am very happy to give the play-by-play of all of the things that I learned, and he hasn't even asked me about what I ate when I was there yet.
Oh, that's on the list. So now that you mentioned it, I'm not a big foodie, but you are, and I know you put some phenomenal pictures of food. So tell the listeners, what did you explore for food? Anything that you've never tried?
Yes.
Let's
I had
hear.
frog's legs for the first time.
Oh, I did see your post on that.
They were delicious. That was the best dish we had the entire time.
Really?
Yeah. So we had one particularly really, really excellent meal for lunch that there's a champagne house that's actually, they're not a house, they're a co-op. And they've been around for about 100 years. Their wine, they're called Champagne Palmer. And they started as a little co-op of 7 growers who pooled their resources and pooled their grape and made a wine. And 100 years later, they're really making these really gorgeous wines that are not as easy to find. We do have some of them available in Massachusetts. They brought us out to lunch before we went and did a couple of hours visit at their winery. We had this wonderful dish that was like onion soup with frog's legs and foie gras and Jerusalem artichokes and walnuts. And oh my God, it was so good. And it went so well with their wines. Oh, it was so delicious. I'll be thinking about it for my whole life.
Then how do you eat the frog legs? You pick it up like a chicken wing?
Yeah, it was like a teeny tiny little chicken leg.
Yeah, small.
Yeah, small, very little. Yeah, like a buffalo wing, only half the size. You just
some of the classic pairings with champagne.
Yeah,
you have those.
We did. So I did do a lot of foie gras. I really like foie.
Really?
But we did oysters and champagne one time at lunch. We did a really nice comparison tasting between heavier styles of champagne versus lighter styles of champagne and what do those go better with. So we sort of did a compare and a contrast. Do they go with cheese? Do they go with vegetables? Do they go with meat? Did a whole variety of things like that. So that's something that I'm very excited to bring back to our market and talk to restaurant folks, servers, beverage managers about wine and food pairings for champagne, that it's not just for a party or for a wedding or for a celebration, but you can pair these things really wonderfully with specific dishes or just general dishes because they are very, very food friendly, as I've always talked about. But it was nice to do a variety of styles of champagne with a lot of different food. So we even did champagne with steak. We didn't have a drop of red wine the entire time. Every single thing that we drank was champagne with everything that we ate. So it really did show that this is a way with anything. I mean, if you can put it with skirt steak and potatoes.
It was interesting to hear from the winemakers about how the different grape varieties expressed their uniqueness depending on the site that they were grown, because we have only a few grape varieties that are used in champagne, and yet they can taste very different depending on where they're grown. So when we had lunch with the folks from Champagne Palmer, Francois Demouy, who was the people who worked there and did a lot of the marketing stuff, really gave us a great oversight about what their Chardonnay tastes like. So take a listen.
And 50% of Chardonnay from Cézanne.
Okay, here's your Cézanne.
We were talking about Cézanne.
No Pied de Blanc at all, which is not usual in Champagne, obviously. But you will see that Chardonnay from Montagne de Reims is more citrus oriented rather than flowers and white flowers and everything. And Cézanne will bring exotic touch at the end, especially like fried pineapple, mango, which the balance is very interesting.
Because the Cézanne, what kind of notes does it use?
The Chardonnay only.
No, but what kind of flavor you say?
It's more exotic fruits, like pineapple and mango.
More, because it's a little bit sour, so more.
The experience just gave you that education, or were they focusing on that as an education point?
The last one where we did a focused tasting of like Brut Champagne and Blanc de Noir and a non-vintage, and let's see what goes best. All the rest of it was sort of our own experience. Like we didn't have a lecture during lunch about try this wine with this dish. It was all just, we were in the moment and we were having our meal, and then we just naturally got to enjoy those two things together.
You mentioned how they were putting this all to you to bring it back and pass it on. It's interesting that Champagne has always been a big brand, really. The region is a brand, and they continue to keep pushing and finding unique ways of getting that brand out there by bringing people like yourself there and showing these new things. It's amazing to me that was the whole history going back to Champagne Charlie when he came to the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he got people hooked on champagne by saying, explore this beverage. I mean, it's just amazing how they keep doing it.
I love that you brought up that concept of champagne with a big C as a brand, because the group that sponsored us and that brought us, they're called the Comité de Champagne. So they are this organization that is in the region that originally was established mostly for research and development. So to help the growers and the producers with the science side of their grape growing winemaking in order to sort of elevate the entire region. So what is that phrase that high tide lifts all boats?
Yeah.
So they were there as this sort of unifying factor that everybody sort of paid a little bit of a fee to. Then they have this research and this development and a little bit of marketing. And they've really just started this educational part of it, like in the last couple of decades. So I feel like in a lot of ways, Champagne hasn't necessarily needed to have people go out into the world and try to, I don't want to say push their wines, because a lot of the big houses have lots of money. And so they have these like brand ambassadors that they hire and that work for them and that go out and be like, hey, let's taste champagne. Let's do all that marketing kind of stuff. But what the interesting thing about the CIVC is that they are not focused on any particular producer or any particular house. And they made a point of being like, don't focus on the houses. Like, don't focus on who the producers are. Let's just focus on the soil, the region, the styles. And so it was much less of like a marketing it for, I think, sales of particular champagnes and more like this is what the region is as a whole. But at one point I brought up that whole idea that you just mentioned, that like Champagne itself kind of is this brand. And I've always thought this, that Champagne has done a better job than I feel like any other region, with the exception of Chianti, of making their wines feel like a unified brand. And so it's less about which one are you buying and more about, oh, Champagne or, oh, Chianti. And this is an extension of that. So as much as they might want to deny, and I hope they're not listening, that, that Champagne's not a brand. It really is a brand. But and it's a recognizable name that other people in the world want to copy. So yeah, it absolutely is a brand.
Definitely. But are they unified because as a region, they've defined the laws. Mm-hmm. So everybody's playing by the same rules, right? I mean, they're so strict that what they grow, the harvest,
so I think a lot of it is like self-protectionist almost. Like it's the protection of the brand. It's the protection of the name. It kind of goes back to those when we talk about the history of the AOC in France and the DOC in Italy, where it's came about because there was so much misuse of regional names and fraud going on that the producers of a particular region were like, no, we need to protect this name so that what people think they're getting is what they're actually getting. And there's a lot of that still. Like when we kind of joke that the Champenois are extremely serious and almost aggressive when it comes to other people using that word champagne anywhere in the globe for anything. Like you can't even buy nail polish that's called champagne anymore. And it's this protection of this name that plays into this sort of overarching thing, that it's not about the particular growers or the particular producers, but it's about the reputation of the region.
I want to talk to you about that protecting, because they do so much to protect the brand, the region. But they also are very open to other ways of promoting the brands. For instance, there was a while, and I think it's still going on, where they were real big on, say, rappers mentioning champagne in their songs.
Mhm.
And it was increasing the sale. They didn't see
But that's
it
still
as
marketing of their
Right.
brand.
they saw that as an opportunity, and they ran with it. And the houses
Some of them
adopted.
did. Some of them had some issues, which
Yeah. So that was kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
So
no. I think
As
that
a-
part of
as
it
a-
is more like this is free advertising for us.
when some people like that, some people thought it was not right for the brand type of thing. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
I think that was part of it. Some sort
Yeah.
of, old fashioned, we have our market and maybe we shouldn't be accepting of other people's being
It-
involved in our
It
brand.
increased awareness for sure
Right.
of champagne.
And I only see that as a good thing. And I think that producers should see the opening of markets to new demographics and to new folks who maybe never would have tried these things before as a benefit to the brand. I think that take all commerce kind of thing.
So there was no focus on touting houses.
No.
Was there focus on explaining smaller production growers or co-ops or
Yeah.
It's-
So what was nice about the way that they arranged our visits was that we had 4 visits to the 4 different types of production. So
Oh,
we
nice.
had one very, very small grower producer who farmed all of his land biodynamically in one tiny little area. He only makes like 2,000 bottles a year, like very, very small production. So we visited that size grower producer. We visited a small house. So small being 250,000 bottles a year. And that's a small house. And then we visited a co-op, and then we visited one of the big brands, one of the top 5 names that everybody would recognize.
was
so
the
we got to
co-op just
see
a
sort of-
grower?
Hmm?
Was the co-op just grower, not producing?
No,
product?
the co-op was grower. They grew and produced their wines. So they
Okay.
had, I think they have maybe 12. I forget now how many growers are in
They're
their co-op.
selling their fruit to the big guys too, correct?
No, they're
No?
allowed to, but I think the majority of the grower's fruit goes to the co-op. They're allowed to have other contracts with other producers, but far and away for those growers, most of what they contribute goes to the co-op wine.
And you said you tasted no red, so I'm assuming rosé and regular champagne. Any still wine?
Rosé and white champagne. Yep.
Any still wines or all sparkling?
All sparkling, but we did taste some wine, base wine, right out of barrel,
What
which I
was your
guess you could
impressions of
count
that?
as still wine.
What's your impression of the wine before it's made into bubbles?
Not done yet.
Yeah, very acidic.
Acidic, just not too green, just not. I have some experience tasting wines out of barrel and wines before they're really finished fermenting, so they definitely carried with them the flavor of, hey, I'm not done yet.
So, did you see the winemaking process? Anything you learned differently on that as far as winemaking and the?
I think I was surprised by the amount of oak. Even though a lot of it was neutral oak, there was still a lot of oak barrels that were in use.
That's for the
Everything
base
was
wine.
extremely clean, which I guess is a nice thing. But,
Right.
I've been to some wineries that, you walk into the basement and you can just smell the fruit flies. But these were, maybe it was because it was winter, but it was very, very clean.
Explain the oak the base wines. Some go into oak.
Yes. So the base wines were aging in oak for a little bit of time to give them some character and then some structure. And then they would be blended and then they would be put in champagne bottles and topped up with a little bit of yeast and a little bit of sugar and then set to age so that those bubbles would be created in the bottle.
So talk about the aging. You saw, I'm sure, a ton of bottles in the cellars. Is it a law in Champagne that they have to turn the bottles by hand?
No.
Or do they have gyro? They
No,
do allow gyro?
there are a lot of gyro pellets. It's too labor intensive with the millions and millions of bottles that are produced every year to be able to do it all by hand. What I did find interesting was that, and I knew this ahead of time, that some of the larger bottles, so like the Magnums and the Jeroboams and things like that, are too big to go in these gyro pellets. So those all have to be hand riddled. And for our listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, riddling is a process where over a slow course of like weeks or months, a champagne bottle is turned slowly so that it's sort of standing on its head, so that all of the residual yeast and sediment from the bottle is in the neck of the bottle, so that they can eventually shoot all that crud out and then recap it really quickly with champagne cork, so that you have the bubbles in the bottle, but that you also have a nice, clear, bright wine. And once upon a time, this used to be all done by hand, and now it's done by machine, except for some of the more special bottles, and then those really big ones, because they literally cannot fit into the machine. So people have to do them.
Interesting. You mentioned, Kim, that a lot of the focus was on the technical, some of the changes they're making. And we've seen Bordeaux is looking at different grapes, allowing different grapes. Is that something Champagne is doing now, where they have to start focusing on maybe allowing other grapes because of climate change?
This was a little bit of a touchy subject when we were there.
Really?
So the answer is yes. There are some experimental plantings that are going on. There is a new grape variety that has been developed that is a very neutral grape variety that has been approved for experimental plantings if you follow certain rules, and it can only be planted in certain areas that maybe aren't great for Pinot Noir or great for Chardonnay. And then slowly, experiments will be done about making wine with this grape and see how it goes. But there doesn't seem to be very much buy-in. But I have to say that our group of educators we were very, very on board with this new grape variety, to the point that when we had these competitions, so the educational organization has actually built all of these like fun interactive learning modules. There's like games and like an online platform where you like compete against your friend, to who can answer the champagne question the quickest. And there's like a Jeopardy style game, and we would name our teams after the new grape. Much to the chagrin of the Champenois folks that we were with. So we got a big kick out of this new grape technology. So we could have fun too.
Is that something you'll take those game ideas back for education for yourself? Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah. Oh, nice. So I'm going to be doing at least 2 classes for the trade, and I hopefully will be able to do a class or 2 for the public as well, where I'm going to use those. And there are some like icebreaker things, but just a lot of neat ideas about tasting and blind tasting and kind of preconceived notions about style and what champagne is. Yeah, just there's so many fun things that I feel like I brought back with me. And I met great people, and they were all really like top class educators and writers and bloggers and just everything. I felt so honored to be with I was with.
Just hearing your excitement, someone who is excited about bubbly anyway, to go to something like this and to get more excited. It's amazing to hear, Kim, how you can learn something new all the time in this field, right? I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah. And this was the perfect place to send me, because I could go 10 times and still be just as excited. So
just a couple more things. Any surprises or unexpected things you discovered other than frog legs? Was there anything that stuck out that you never knew or you never saw? Or
I was surprised by the innovation from some of the producers, especially some of the really long-standing producers. I was very excited that we visited Biacart Salmon, who I mentioned once before. The current owner, he's 7th or 8th generation. I think he's the 7th generation of the family to run the winery, to run the house. And even some place like Champagne, where they have hundreds of years of history under the same label, and you would think that they're the same wines, over time, even some place like Champagne reacts to market shifts and to changing taste and changing trends. So their wines have really undergone this style change over the last decade or 2 decades, even down to the labels are different, and they kind of look like their old labels had been, but they were sort of gussied up a little bit and changed just slightly. And they have a new one that has more oak on it, but it's not like big, toasty, crazy spice bomb kind of oak. It was just very delicate and refined, and just this idea that there are still changes happening in a place that you think of as fairly staid and old-fashioned. It really isn't. There's a lot of tradition and there are a lot of rules that need to be followed, but even within those confines, there is innovation and there is creativity going on. So I felt that was very refreshing, and just to see that with younger people getting going into the industry, whether it's their family business or whether it is bouncing around in the world of wine. I felt like everybody that we talked to who was under the age of 40 still came from some sort of wine tradition. Either, they had a family member who made wine in a different region, and so then they went to school and now they're here. Or there's one young lady who she's from Champagne and now she works in Champagne, and she's just like over the moon that this is what she does every day. And she's 29 years old. So it's just nice to see both the tradition, but then also that this is still is really a modern, vibrant industry.
And I saw that you brought back one of your favorites.
I did. I brought back
Can you
a
tell
couple.
the listeners the experience, how you did it? Did it go okay as far as any tips for packing or when you're traveling with wine, things like that?
Yeah,
Especially
so
with
I
that.
planned ahead. I had these packing sleeves that were like bubble wrap, but in the shape of a wine bottle. So you could pack your bottle of wine in this bubble wrapped thing. And I only brought home a couple bottles of wine. I brought home a special bottle for my son for his 21st birthday when he gets there from his birth year. So I was super excited to find that. And then just some things for some friends. And I packed them in those bubble wrappy things. And then I put them in my luggage surrounded by clothes and was just really hoping that nothing would happen in my suitcase, and everything came home fine. So
hear any
I was a little
pops.
worried. One of the things that we learned on the trip was the weight of a champagne bottle and how much, and we did this in the context of the carbon footprint of the region and what the region is trying to do as far as environmental preservation and, water preservation, and making sure that the wine bottles maybe can be a little bit lighter so that their carbon footprint is a little bit smaller. And so we talked a bit about how the traditional champagne bottle has actually lost a few grams of weight because they're trying to be, better for the environment. So as I got to the airport and I realized what I had packed, and I'm like, oh, I actually know how much a champagne bottle weighs now because that was part of our lesson. And
There
I'm
you
like,
go.
I'm doing math in my head as I'm putting my suitcase on the conveyor belt, being like, okay, if a pint's a pound the world around and it's 930 grams for the glass of champagne, like how heavy is my bottle of champagne? So yeah, so math.
Did
There's
you go
still
under
math
the
in
weight?
wine.
Were you under the luggage weight?
Yes, I was, because I packed light. So because I was planning on bringing bottles home. So I'm like, okay, all right, I have to plan.
Any other tips for our listeners about thinking about traveling the Champagne? Is it a thumbs up? Do it?
It's a
Or
thumbs
any-
up. Make reservations ahead of time because most of the places to visit will not take walk-ins. So you need to either email or, go on the website of any particular house that you want to visit and make an appointment.
Is that because of COVID rules?
No, I think it's
so
just
crowded.
just tourists. Yeah. And some places you're going to get different treatments at different places. And I think it's hard to know. But if you have a favorite champagne and you really want to visit them and you are going to the region, I would say definitely make an appointment at some places that you would want to visit. And try things, and don't be afraid if they talk about zero dosage will have absolutely no sugar in it and is bone dry, or something that is a little bit sweeter. Just try stuff, eat the local food, go to the cathedral, drink hot chocolate.
Yeah.
Enjoy yourself.
I was jealous before talking to you, and still jealous, but I look forward hopefully getting an offer to go to one of the classes or taking up one of the classes, seeing what you learned.
I will save you a seat, Mark.
Well, thanks, Kim. I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing about your invention. We get your excitement here. It's coming across. I hope the listeners.
Well,
are
thank you.
feeling
Thank
that.
you for dedicating an entire show to talking to me about my trip.
How could we not? I mean, this is big news. When the bubbly queen goes to Champagne, everyone we need to know. So
yeah, it was really wonderful. It was a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to sharing what I learned with everyone.
thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone. We are a program that is supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at The Wonderful World of Wine. You can find Kim at CommonwealthWineSchool.com. You can find myself at FranklinLiquors.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Wine Education. And our past episodes are on SoundCloud or iTunes. Cheers.